Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our June lecture, and I can see that our talker today has drawn quite a crowd. Fantastic. Before we do start though, I'd begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Because we may have a few new people in the audience, I'd just like to draw your attention to the fact that this program has been going for over 30 years. So we invite people, usually at a time in their life when they can reflect, to talk about their life and to tell their story and to comment on life as they understand it. We've built a really rich resource here at the QV Mag. The Friends organisation manage it, but it's very much a museum project, oral history project, and it's a wonderful resource for future historians and academics to draw on. Today we have a speaker who understands firsthand the value of research. It's my very great pleasure to welcome Emeritus Professor Margaret Robertson to add to our community well of knowledge. But before I do, a little background. And I'd also like to say how wonderful it is to see colleagues of Margaret's from days long past and students too. In 2006, Margaret was appointed Director of Research in the Faculty of Education at La Trobe University and Professor of Education in May 2007. Based at the Melbourne campus, this involved leadership coordination and teaching of research methods in education, the core unit of the Master of Education program and oversight of the Education doctoral program, which attracted, I probably should say, many international students as well as Australian. She has maintained a leadership role in externally funded research projects relating to innovative pedagogies and digital technologies. So when we were having a few projector moments this morning, Margaret wasn't one bit fazed. Findings reinforce the need for personalised learning beyond school and local boundaries and for conceptual thinking in teaching and learning. Research interests and related publications have focused on pedagogical renewal, e-learning, geographical education and sustainable development. More recent interests relate to place and space constructs in urban renewal, schooling, notably vertical schools, and pedagogical responses within non-traditional physical space. Margaret's CV, and I have a copy in my bag, which has weighed down my bag considerably, it's remarkable and highlights the breadth and depth of her research, publications, international experience, collaborations and partnerships. She's appointed to national positions, such as the national curriculum, many of which of these positions she's led. The list of her keynote speaking engagements is like one's wonderful travel to-do book. Her writings in books and journals, peer reviews, supervisory roles, for doctors and master's students, funded research grants, etc., is extensive. So, reading Margaret's CV, I have been both impressed and exhausted. If it's publication or perish in academia, Margaret has and continues to thrive. Prior to 1990, when Margaret left the Tasmanian senior secondary college system for the University of Tasmania, which laid the foundation for her academic career, I taught with Margaret, as did Tom McGlynn, Carol Fuller, who are here today, taught with Margaret at Launceston College, where she was head of geography. When she retired to Tasmania, though I don't think retired is quite the word, we renewed our friendship, and during COVID lockdown, Margaret and I enjoyed many a walk and a talk. It was actually just prior to the epidemic that I convinced Margaret to talk at this occasion. So I've been looking forward to this talk for over a year now, and I don't think I'll be disappointed. I expect Margaret's talk to be like Margaret herself, both learned and a bit of fun. So I invite Margaret now to take the stage, so to speak.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Jill, for your introduction. I'm panicking a little bit because it's a lot to live up to, but and I was reminded of this yesterday. I was in the post office and I saw a couple of books. One said, "Keep calm, you're only 50." The other one said, "Keep calm, you're only 70." I didn't see one for "Keep calm, you're only 80", so maybe there's another publication for me to work on. I too would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Don't panic. We're waiting to hear a little music. I'm not panicking, but listen. Peter Sculthorpe's music was being played when you arrived. I don't know whether anyone recognised it. But of course, you would know that he was a Launcestonian. And born in 1929, his talent and his passion for music were apparent early. And he pursued his goals and did what he wanted to do into a life of music. I wanted to start with this music because it highlights for me something that I reflect on as being very important, and that is capturing the sounds of nature, our sense of belonging, our surroundings, listening to the sounds of Australian birds, our flora, capturing our weather, and indeed capturing our Indigenous communities. His was music that found a blend of the West and the sounds of Asia, a great scholar who has made, I believe, a difference on the Australian landscape of music. I didn't really value his music initially. The more I listen to it now, the more I appreciate just what a visionary he was. And he was born on this island. That island provided, our island provided him with his stimulation and his source of reference. So it's difficult to compare, but if I attempt to dissect my own life, I have searched for reasons why I have done what I've done, and perhaps like Sculthorpe, led a life pretty different from my peers. To understand a little bit of that life, you really have to go back. If I go back to my beginnings, I'm the product of colonial settlement. Both my families on both sides of my life were farming families. They settled on the northwest coast back in the 19th century. And I reflect now that they brought with them from their origins in Scotland an aesthetic of how to live and how to transform the colony into what they wanted. They wanted to change it and make it look like home. Their journeys must have been perilous, they must have been arduous, and they must have been a desperation. So they arrive in the colony, and probably mostly from the lowland clearances in Scotland, in my case, with an image, if you like, of how to live life well and how to make that life. And what I find fascinating reflecting back now, as I have done over the years and countless journeys back to Scotland and into those places, is the similarity in the landscape of where they started their lives and what they brought by way of their imagery here, and how they've, like a palimpsest, they've covered the landscape here with their image of what they viewed as being home. Not home for the Indigenous community, but home for the Scottish ascetic living now in the colony in Tasmania. So I need to go back to the beginning. And there are links there, they're quite interesting ones. I found these very early on. I started travelling quite young. I graduated, saved money and went off. Most of my friends were getting mortgages and having families, and I kind of bypassed all of that or missed it somehow. Much to my mother's chagrin, she didn't get to do all the knitting that she wanted to do. But anyway, the origins for me go back to the borders of Scotland and to Jedburgh. If you've been there, you'll know that there is this most imposing structure, the Abbey, the Jedburgh Abbey. And in that abbey, I found on my first visit there in 1974 a headstone which fascinated me. Now, I pick up also the link to Inchbonny. Inchbonny is the name of my maternal grandparents' property just out of Penguin. So on the right-hand side is a photograph of the grave that bears the links between Jedburgh in Scotland and Penguin, Tasmania. It's extraordinary, isn't it? In the grounds of this abbey. And then to marry with that and to complement that, the headstone on the left is a headstone which exists today in the Penguin Cemetery. And here you see the link between Janet Grant, who married Charles Lillicoe, who was a brother of my great-grandfather, and they settled in Penguin and took up a landholding there back in about the 1850s. I can be more precise, but I'll leave it at that. So there's the beginning on my mother's side. My great-grandfather even made it to the Cyclopedia of Tasmania. You may know that that document is a history of early significant Tasmanians. It tells of his contribution there, and he was a fairly significant character, I believe, in the farming community and on the northwest coast. His son was my grandfather, Mr. A.M. Lillicoe, you'll see there. He was called Sandy Lillicoe, removed, as it says, one of the oldest pioneer farmers of the Penguin municipality. He was the youngest son of, and then the links back through to Scotland. And Grandad Lillicoe married Edith Gertrude. I'm named after Edith Gertrude. I didn't like that name for a long time, appreciate it much more now. Miss Edwards, and they married and lived their lives at Inchbonny and raised 7 children, one of whom was my mother. So on the other side of the family, just to give the family history, my father was the son of Mr. Robertson, David William Roy Robertson of Sassafras. My father got the name of Roy. I'm assuming it's come from his own father. They were slightly later settling in the Sassafras area, East Sassafras to be precise, in the 1870s, and we read that he was quite a stalwart of the local community. I love the expression here. It says he retired through effluxion of time last year, which I think is rather a quaint phrase and a reference to how language has changed over the years. So from these two families, Roy, George and Isabel, Margaret, were married. And they then had two children. I'm one and John is the other. Just to go back a little bit, it's, I think, quite extraordinary how the images created by these families mirror the images back there in Scotland. I mean, can you pick out which is the northwest coast and which is the Scottish lowlands? It's fascinating, isn't it? And that's been a lifelong area of research for me. People, place, their landscape aesthetics and how their values, if you like, and how their cognitive processing shapes what they do, their behaviours, and how they bring about changes in their own environment and space. I just am quite fascinated by this and trying to collect enough to write, I hope, another book sometime. Well, I'll give you one only of the, if I can get it to work, the family photos, and then we'll leave them. And again, some kind of social commentary here. Bear in mind, this is Depression time, pre-war, wartime. Both my parents were fairly bright students at school, but you know, they were the middle children of 7 in each case, and so they lived in the country. To go on in education, it required boarding, and that was costly and expensive. I suspect their dreams were dashed in many ways. Their hopes for their own futures were cut short. I'll refer to the photograph in the bottom first of all, because this one really amuses me. This is my father. I suspect it might be at City Hall in Hobart. Can you see that he and the ladies have ice creams in their hands? Wearing the dinner suits. I'm not quite sure that it kind of reflects our current standards of maybe having a glass of champers, but in those days apparently it was an ice cream, and I find that quite amusing. Dad left the farm, he hated it, and he pursued a life training mostly in Queenstown at the School of Mines into an engineering pursuit, and set up his own business. My mother wanted to be a nurse. She trained, she was accepted for nursing at the Launceston General Hospital here. She would have been quite a young woman when this photograph was taken. And it's quite extraordinary when you start to look at these things and reflect, and you go through your own personal archives, you find things you didn't know you had. And I found, and I'm stunned that these even existed or that they'd been kept and I was able to find them. I found an envelope and it says birth certificate and references, handwritten. And inside I found 3 handwritten, or one's on a typewriter, but 2 handwritten references for my mother to go to nursing. To whom it may concern, it says this one. Miss Isabel, Bell she was known as, M. Lillico, has been well known to me for the past 12.5 years, 3 of which were as a scholar at my school, where she passed the merit certificate in December 1925. As a scholar, she was painstaking and industrious with more than an average ability. And so I could go on. So we have a picture of 2 adults who had ambition, and ambition probably cut short or falling a long way short of their dreams. My mother was called home to the farm. That was the end of her ambition and the end of her nursing career. I think I'm a beneficiary of their dreams, and I would like to acknowledge that. So the photographs then, my mother and Margaret as the baby, a sad photograph but a happy one of Margaret and John. John sadly deceased in 1954, a family tragedy. And then on the right-hand side, graduating university and about to hit the big world. 1950s, of course, was an interesting time we reflect on, don't we? I mean, just as these letters are a symbol of the technology of the time, the 1950s, of course, was a time which I think most of us in this room would well recognise. Learning to write with a pen and ink, the telephone up the end of the hallway where you wound it up and you got through to the operator, and of course you'd have a gossip first before you got your hook to the appropriate number. The operator knew everybody's business, and that was it. We sent telegrams. I was sent to boarding school at Friends in Hobart eventually. The communication was through letters, handwritten letters. Didn't go home very often, once a term, that was it. Didn't have cause to speak on a telephone, none of the daily social media, none of that. The box brownie, the tranny. Do you remember the tranny? You know, the one that the kids used to walk around with and have at their ear all the time. And I found this photograph of the ute. Now, the ute in my childhood was pretty important. My father had a ute, that beginning of the Holden Empire in Australia, and he had that for his business. My mother had it for the Girl Guides picnics. So can you imagine that ute at the back of it full of eager young children we were, all excited and going all over the place? Can you imagine what a nightmare it would be now, and how it might be treated if the police saw that happening out there somewhere? So that was the 50s. The other things I'd like to reference from this period, and then I'll move off fairly quickly. Life was simple. Childhood was simple, but it was good. I spent a lot of time on the farm at Inchbonny with my cousins. There were 3 families on the farm, so I had a lot of company. Didn't have siblings, but I had a lot of cousins and a lot of fun. And at home there were 2 very important books, and I think this is a reflection going back to my parents and thinking of their dreams and aspirations. Dad had a copy of Webster's Dictionary, which I retain today, and that's a photograph from my bookshelves, looking a bit worse for wear now. But you notice up the writing, he was a left-hander made to write right hand, so the writing's not too good either. R.G. Robertson, 5th of June 1928. Now in 1928 he would have been 17. That's quite an amazing purchase, isn't it, when you think of it, for a 17-year-old. So again, I think there's a reflection of a dream, an unfulfilled aspiration of where he wanted to go. He was a bright boy, but didn't get that chance. And the other book in our home was the Atlas. So I still remember my father saying, go and look it up in the dictionary, Mark. Get the Webster's out. Let's find where it is in the Atlas. So there may not have been television or a lot of extra input, but there are always these resources and our imagination. Imagination, imagination, imagination. Really very important. And I reflect on those 2 stimuli, if you like, as being fairly instrumental in pursuing, as I have done, a life in learning, knowledge, expanding my own thinking. Well, big changes started to happen in the 1980s. I was teaching and was getting a bit bored, and I enrolled in a Master of Education, and this is where I started to pick up the research bug, and particularly looking at connections between people, place, and their thinking processes. So I completed a Master of Education, and I started to get involved and very busy in committees and looking outside the local space, and got into some, leadership roles in national committees, and I enjoyed that, loved it. And I was beginning to really expand my own sense of awareness, I suppose, and self-confidence, and learning that I could communicate with people away from the small northwest coast origins, where I was a very, very shy young girl when I first started. So it was confidence building and capacity building, if you like, in a way. And so I'm rocking along and getting a bit bored with all of what's happening, and I started to do a PhD, and the opportunity came to move into the university sector. And I should pause there because that's really where my life took off. So the PhD was done on that little machine down there. Do you remember the Mac Plus? You'll see some themes coming through here. Communication, technology. We've now moved on from these, and this is the beginnings of technology. This is in the 80s. The PhD was done on these, you know. This presentation alone would blow that bit to bits. I used to lug that around everywhere. I was terrified I was going to lose it all. So, you know, here's your life's work bound up in this thing. And on the right-hand side, just a couple of images from conferences of the time. I was the convener of the National Conference of Geography Teachers at one stage, and you'll see in that top image, if I can get this thing to work for me, an image of, where am I? Where's it gone to? Peter Scott, Professor Peter Scott, who was a great mentor of mine. He was Professor of Geography, and he was one of the keynotes there. There's some other notables there. The bottom photograph is really a tribute to a person, I think, who made a big difference to my life as growing up, and that's to Dr. William Oates and the Friends School and the Quaker tradition. The encouragement received from that school and the teaching I received there really did provide the scaffolding I needed from country Tasmania into a bigger life. So a tribute to Bill Oates, who's written some remarkable books. A pacifist. If you have a mind, it's well worthwhile tapping into his writings. And on the right, Dr. Sheila Given, who was involved with the things I was doing at that time and was principal of the middle school at Friends. So we're moving on now, and we're hitting the big scene. And PhD finished, and then my opportunities to move into the international scene really started to take off. I was at that conference where Nelson Mandela was the, well, he wasn't the keynote, he was it. This was the conference of the International Geographical Union in Durban. Professor Ann Buttimer was the president at the time. I don't know whether you've been in the presence of someone of this giant proportions. It's quite extraordinary. I mean, I get goosebumps when I think about it. You could have heard a pin drop in that auditorium. And if we have time or another time, I can tell you quite a lot about that experience. It was remarkable. And also the way in which he spoke. Greatness is greatness for a purpose, I recognise from that. His ability to communicate, to take a complex idea and put it into simple language, and he did that for us at the time, was extraordinary. So we all felt more than a little humbled by that. Now I'm going to come back to Anne. Anne has played quite a large bit in my life since sadly passed away. She was Professor of Geography at the University of Dublin, and also spent quite a long time in the United States. She was a Catholic nun during much of her academic life. In later life, she decided to leave the order, and she married a Swedish researcher. So quite an interesting change. So it's all kicking off for me, and I'd say probably if I can pinpoint it, it was finishing my PhD. I was invited to present papers at the conference of the International Geographical Union in Berlin and in Prague. And it was there that I met my mob, if you like, my research mob, with whom I've been collaborating and regard as personal friends. And so that was a huge moment. I remember going off to this conference, and I had a few days in London, hadn't been overseas for a long time, and I thought, I'm ready to go home now. And the conference was ahead of me. So I arrived in Berlin, and it was like a bomb hitting me. I met the people who were in my mindset. You know, we had a lot in common, and we overcome any communication problems there were. And it was there that I met my Finnish friends, and I'm wearing a Finnish jacket today, incidentally, as a tribute to them. They said to me at the end of my presentation, "We understand you. You speak slowly. You speak in a language which is not colloquial language. We understand what you're saying. And so from there, bonds were formed which have really shaped my life, and you'll see that as we move through. I've been a traveller, and this was where big-time travel took off. So I would say for the next 20-odd years, I was a visitor to Finland, and would have been again last year, this year, had things not changed the way they have, and also to Germany, particularly into Bavaria, and to the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg. So both fairly important friendships and journeys there. And it was the time when email started. You know, early 1994 this was. I had been introduced to email. My European friends hadn't been introduced to email, but they were motivated to do so. And so email was the way in which we established the communication, and things took off. So that was remarkable. You remember the old dial-up modems? And didn't work. Didn't work. Come back in half an hour, and maybe you lock in. So that again was the beginnings of big changes in our global communities. I remember writing a chapter in a book called Born in 1990. Well, I mean, you know, the rest is history there, isn't it? At one of the conferences I went to, it was in London, pardon me, and it again was a conference of the Geographical Association, and at the end of it there was a small figure standing at the back, and he said to me, "Margaret, you wouldn't like to come to Cambridge and work for a year, would you? University of Cambridge?" And I said, "Excuse me? You wouldn't like to come to the University of Cambridge and work for a year, would you?" And I said, "Would I what?" I mean, you know. So there was my next big, huge change in life and opportunity. Isn't it amazing? When you reflect back, there are significant times in your life where things kick off into another dimension. And the Cambridge experience, again, has been a continuing part of my life to today. That photograph is an image taken in the orchard, Rupert Brooke's orchard, the famous orchard, which some of you may well have been to in Grantchester. You'll see some images in a moment. I've spent a lot of time sitting on those chairs and having Devonshire tea and cups of tea and chatting and debating. Yeah, the project I worked on was called the Land Use UK project. It was a national study of land use in Britain, and it was the data were collected by children in schools as well as adults all over the country. And when they collected the data, they asked these surveyors if they would reflect on what they'd viewed in their 1 kilometre squares that they were surveying. So this is all over Britain, Northern Ireland. And the scripts were then recorded, and those scripts from the 20,000 surveyors from all over Britain became part of a continuing resource, and I was asked to analyse that data. It was just amazing. It took me 3 months to read it, and then to try and interpret the data, of course, was the next dilemma, and that's where a lot of my most significant publications really did take off. I mean, needless to say, the University of Cambridge was a nice banner to have with your name as well. So I was lucky. The lass at the bottom, Emma, I remember fondly. We worked at a research station called Monk's Wood out of Huntington, and there were some fairly interesting people there. I can tell you a lot of stories about that one too. Emma actually word processed all that data over all the period of time. The data were in that form you're seeing there, here in the image just there. And there was a book that was a product of that whole project. Now the other thing I want you to notice here, how many males there are in these images. I'm delighted to see so many men here today. But I have to say mine's been a masculine environment most of my working life, as you'll see. And I hope that's changing in this generation. Oh no, I want to go back again. I want to go back to where the pointer is. The gentleman there is Rex Walford. Rex Walford, a most extraordinary man, awarded an OBE, tragically drowned in the Thames at the age of 76. I could tell an extraordinary story of him. His funeral really was testament to his what he'd achieved in his life. It was held at the memorial at Ely Cathedral, which is the biggest of all the cathedrals in the UK. There were 800 people there. A giant of a man, small in stature, but quite an extraordinary man, and a wonderful mentor for me, as were all those characters there. So I started off a life of association with Wolfson College, where I've been a visiting fellow and scholar for many, many years. And this is where, if you go to Cambridge, this is where life is, you know. I mean, it's a good life, really, if you're on the right side of the banner. If you get to Parker's Piece, which is in the middle of Cambridge, you'll find a sign which says, "The real world starts here." The colleges are on this side, the real world's over there. And let me tell you, there's a big difference. So, you know, you're walking around and you have access into these wonderful spaces, including sitting in King's for Evensong whenever you want. As a member of the university community, you have a very privileged life, and I've been privileged to have that in my lifetime. So the publications started to churn out. And one of the ones I'm probably, well, perhaps the most significant achievement in my academic career is the one that's up the top here. And that was an outcome of this particular project. That was published in the Geographical Journal, which is a journal a bit like Nature as far as geographers are concerned. That was volume 160 at that point. So add on the years now, it's been going for a very, very long time, and one of the original journals of the Academy of Sciences. So you can see what I'm sort of interested in: youth cultures, and running along with technologies, and I'm doing quite well with that. In fact, I then got into applying for grants and was successful with some research grants, and those research grants led to more publications and more interesting things. So and so it's chugging along. Go on. And in parallel with all of the work at home, of course, you know, you're generating income and research, and that's more data, and you've got to get that data out into for people to work with, and to, you hope, bring about some changes in their practice, their professional practice. I mean, I was always all about trying to encourage educators to take young people out into the real world. The classroom, as I've always said, is not the real world. This room is not the real world. Your minds and what's out there is the real world. And this was always my mantra, if you like, with students. And so research, field work, really very important in terms of encouraging the development of confidence of the young people and into their thinking, and also using the tools they have. And the other thing I've learned is that the humble can teach you a great deal. Now, we're going back to Durban. This is the time when I was in the presence of Nelson Mandela. We were at a school in Zululand in South Africa, Richards Bay, and we were in a class of Zulu children. There would have been about 60 children in that class. The teacher you're seeing there is the same teacher I'm interacting with. She was brilliant. She had sustainable development practices operating with these kids. She had projects running outside in the school grounds, and we corresponded after that. You know, we set up a friendship. I mean, they're very enriching, these contacts, and they needn't be just as an observer from a tour bus. They can be on the ground where you're meeting people and you're really getting a sense of their lives and they of yours. I just loved it. I mean, I've kept these images all this time. They're very special. I look at these faces and they're so full of hope and joy. Their surroundings are incredibly poor by our standards. And here we are, we're, the international tourists, if you like, or delegates rocking into their space. And we learned as a group to ask something, an important question, and it's a question that stood me in good stead. We said, what would you like us to tell our students about where you live when we go back home? Within a nanosecond, these kids said, the dance. Come on. And they stripped off their uniforms and got into their dance costumes, and they did the dance. Now, for the young ones, it was also topless. No hesitation at all. These are the secondary school kids. So there's a lesson there, isn't there? What's at the heart of what we're thinking? Think about my Scottish ancestors. They carry these deep images within them about what's important in their lives, and what they carry, gives them unity, a sense of well-being, if you like. And I learned a great deal from that experience, and I do wonder whether this young Zulu woman has fulfilled her dreams as well as she might, beyond the dance and into a significant life. That's more than 20 years ago now. Now, going back to Anne Buttimer, she, of course, was observing what was going on, and she was the international president of this group, of the International Geographical Union. Next opportunity came was in Russia. I've had a fascination with Russia all my life, I think, Russian literature. As soon as I could, as a young traveller back in my early 20s, I went to Russia camping. That was an experience. I could tell you another story about that one. And so this, of course, wasn't quite camping, but there you go. We flew into Moscow. This was a regional conference in the city of Barnaul, which is east of Novosibirsk, so a long way from anywhere. Getting out towards the border with Mongolia and Kurdistan. A 4-hour plane ride from Moscow, and the plane itself was an interesting experience. So we arrived there, the international delegates, and here we are, and Anne was officiating as the president. Now, I could spend the next half hour talking about that experience, but I will have taken up too much time, and I won't have got where I want to go, and I need to move quickly because of time. Suffice to say that the Russian geographers had developed a document on sustainable development and education for sustainable development, and they wanted it published in the West. They wanted it published to go global. Anne knew that it really needed some good editing, and it needed someone who knew about teaching and learning or pedagogy to put it into shape. So she pulled me into the mix, and there began my next opportunity, and this one here it's just been very special. I got to write an application, a research grant application with just a few pics of the local scene there before we move on. It was just amazing countryside and scenery. Just stunning in so many ways. You were so far from anywhere. So this project then was to try and develop a resource that could go to all countries, and certainly mobilise the experiences of developing countries. And so we got funding for 10 developing countries to participate in this project, and I wrote the application and built in the fact that we would need to have some training for this, and we had that training for 2 weeks in Rome. So for 2 weeks we stayed not too far away from the heart of Rome. The Colosseum was just there, and we walked across the road up through a lovely little pathway to what's called the Villa Celimontano. And the Villa Celimontano was then the home of the geographers, the Geographical Association of Italy. And it was there that we worked for the next 2 weeks, and we did also enjoy one another's company. The characters there come from all over the world. So from left, Georgia, he was one of the Russians who was involved. Chanchai from Thailand, Alvaro, Mexico, Wu from China, Gabriel, who was a priest and a geographer from Argentina, Morris, he was from South Africa, Manuela Ferrara, the other woman, and Hugo from Chile, and then our friend on the end from India. So it was, again, amazing. Now, bear in mind technology again. We each had laptops by that time, but the plugging systems weren't terribly crash hot. We're in the middle of this wonderful room, floor-to-ceiling books everywhere, and underneath the floor there of this great big table, there are wires and cables going everywhere. So every now and then one of the colleagues would disappear under the table and try and sort out the cables. So just some images of a very wonderful experience in my life. We called ourselves the Celiographers after the Villa Celimontano, and we of course were geographers. And we've met wherever there's been a conference and we've been able to get there. You look around to see if there any of the Celiographers are there. So sometimes you might look around and you'll see down there, oh, woo, woo, and you shout out a name like this and this person bobs up from the conference and it's old friends meeting again. Very special. I put Nico down the bottom there because he was a pretty special character, and he probably and his colleagues from the Russian Academy of Science were the ones who were the stimulants for this project, and he's since passed away. But when we finished the project and published the book, the Academy in Russia actually asked to translate his document. So I can say I've been translated into Russian and also into Finnish. I can't read either. I can say a few words. Part of the experience also of this project was the opportunity to visit in situ, not just in Rome, but in situ where the projects were happening. And one of the places I went to was in India, quite an amazing experience for me again. My first experience of India and the problems that are faced from an environmental perspective, humanitarian perspective, in pollution perspective, on so many levels you wouldn't believe it. So I learned a lot from that experience and felt extremely humbled by the work that people who had very few resources were able to achieve. Again, you see it's a fairly masculine group of people, and that seems to have been the experience of my life, but they continue to do good work there. And just a little segue here as an amusing one. Thailand's also been on my radar. I have done some work with the ministry there, and basically through the embassy originally, our embassy, this lady here, Kun Art, worked as the education person in the Australian embassy, and I happened to meet her and was invited to assist with some professional development for their school directors nationally. And so this is at the end of a week-long project working with I can tell this story could go on forever. But I want to tell you this because I think you'll find it funny. So I'm on my way to Europe. I don't normally travel with a lot of fancy gear when I travel. So I have one skirt with me, and you can see it there. Fortunately, it was a silk skirt. Don't quite know how it came out of the bag, but it did. And the woman who is where am I? Oh, sorry. I want to get her because she's interesting. Oh, I've gone too far. Well, anyway, you can see. Just one of the women, the tallest woman at the back. She was the head of a school in Bangkok with 5,000 students. Not unusual in Bangkok. Quite a tour de force, this lady, very slender, beautifully dressed. She would arrive each day wearing the complete silk outfit with matching jewellery, quite wealthy also too. And so when this photograph was taken, I walked in and she kind of looked at me from the feet up to the head, and then she turned around and she said to me, "I like your skirt." So that's Thailand. Well, in the middle of all of this, I eventually transferred to Melbourne and have been working at La Trobe University since 2006. I love this image. It's a statue in the grounds of La Trobe University. It's Charles La Trobe on his head. And of course, if you know anything, perhaps some of you know that La Trobe is a university which is not like Melbourne University. It was to cater for the burgeoning masses of the outer suburbs of Melbourne. So for first-time university students, full of lefties, left-wingers and Robert Mann type people, and so the public intellectuals, if you like. And I loved it. It was just my scene. No pretension, just what I enjoy, people being real, and a lot of diversity, huge international student population. Very sadly, of course, not happening at the moment. Ooh. Well, the photographs that you're going to that I think you're going to see, I hope you're going to see, reflect some of my activities there and involvement with international students. I was really very fortunate to work with a lot of... there we are. Thank you very much. Thank you, my saviour. These are my boys, and I mean, it gets a bit embarrassing, but the one, that handsome one on the right, used to call me Mum. And I still get messages if something significant happens in his life, like he, you know, has a child or gets remarried or whatever, he says, "Dear Mum." And I don't have a heart to tell him, really, perhaps he shouldn't. But I was immensely privileged working with these wonderful people, mostly from the southern continent, from many from Saudi Arabia, and men, you notice. And again, I can tell you a little social story about that one at another time. We were wonderful friends, and I learnt to hear and see the world from their perspective, again, in very different ways. Barriers get broken down when you're working intensely with people, and you get to know them very closely about their own fears and their hopes and their dreams. And we used to talk for 2 hours every second week, so we did get to know one another very well. I mean, they would walk into my office and give me a hug, those men, and that was pretty rare for Saudi Arabic men to do that, and so some barriers were broken there. And on the right-hand side is Tin, dear Tin. Tin is one of my PhD graduates from Vietnam, and has kept in contact. He has a senior role, as many of these people do now and back in their own countries. And he came to visit me with his son 2 years ago here in Tasmania. And I took him out to the wildlife park at Mole Creek. He had an absolute ball, loved it. Dear little boy, but I felt, well, maybe there is a purpose to what you do in life. You do have an impact on people's lives. He made that journey to Melbourne and he wanted to come to Tasmania to see me. I felt quite humbled by that. Well, another pinnacle, and I know I'm conscious of time, so I need to whip through some of these. This is another big project I've been involved with, again by invitation, from the geography community, but also again because by now I'm sort of giving a leading expert voice, if I can call it that way, on technologies and innovative teaching and learning. And this was a project set up ambitiously to have an International Year of Global Understanding. It had quite a number of successes. Its driver was a gentleman here in Germany, and these are some of the people involved. Again, you notice it's a very masculine view of the world, and these people here are quite extraordinary figures in their own ways. Again, I felt pretty humbled, but I'm very proud of what we were able to achieve there, and that little book down the bottom is that part of that. I have to keep moving, because I really want to get through this. In 2016, I went to Mongolia, and again, another colleague that I'd worked with for 20 years invited me as a visiting scholar there, and this I think you'll probably find is quite interesting. There she is, Professor Dr. Bachelam Yambui. Mongolia is based, their education system is based on Russian traditions. Russian is their second language for most people. English has always been a struggle for her, but we've worked together and we've helped one another, and I've helped her with publications and so on. We're best mates. And this is Ulaanbaatar. Some of you may have been there. Now, this is Bachelam when she gets out into the countryside. the first day she said to me, the first night, I arrived there late at night, and she says, you don't mind talking to our teachers tomorrow. They're here, it's their first day back from the holidays. They're from all over Mongolia. You'll have about an hour and a half. I'll pick you up at 8:30 in the morning. Right? She said, you don't have to do anything new. So I walked to this group of eager faces, and I thought, I'll teach them something. So I said to them, in Australia we have a way of being able to find each other. We learn to cooee. So by the end of the first minute, I had them all cooeing beautifully, and was able to work on for there. The next day, we get to the university building, and Bachelor said to me, you don't mind going upstairs, do you? No. It's a terrible stench of paint pigment. They'd just painted the building. Russian-style buildings, not very flash. So at the end of 7 flights of stairs, all irregular steps, we get to the top. And she said, now, you don't mind talking to my students? They've just arrived here back from holidays. We've got about 2 hours. No. So I remembered that trick of saying to them, what would you like me to tell your students? And their hands went up like that, and they said, the horse and the gare. The gare is the ute. Okay. And so I said, well, how about you draw what you think is home? And so this filled in the next half hour. Each of the students actually drew an image of what they saw as home. And I walked around that room, about 30 or 40 students in the room, and every image was similar. You see, we're a nation of diversity. Mongolia is a nation of homogeneity, homogeneous culture, similar values, views, including songs. I mean, I've learnt that songs and singing are an important part here. So, you think back to my Scottish ancestors again, what they would have carried and how that's varied. So, just quickly, we went to the gare. Would you like to go to a tourist gare or to a real gare? And I said, a real gare, of course, I'm a geographer. So off we go. There's no roads outside the city, so you're tracked by your nose, I think, or whatever. And eventually we got to the gare. Those tanks there filling up with horse milk. You notice the solar panels? There is nothing there. There is nothing there but the gare. So you're in the middle of nowhere. If you want to go to the loo, you go over to the bushes as far as you go, because there's not many trees, well, there are no trees. The welcome was the sheep's gizzards, cooked by the lady here with cow dung or horse dung. That's the fuel. And fortunately, I had said that I'm allergic to dairy products, so that was a great help on this journey. They bought me some beer, and I was very grateful for that. But I'd just like you to look at the faces. The man on the right was our driver. He's my friend's colleague, and he's a dentist in Ulaanbaatar, a professional man. This is his family home. Now, look, he's arrived. He's no longer looking like he should be wearing his shirt, and within less than an hour, he's back to being in the countryside, back to his roots. The origins are there. The horses are milked 7 times a day, every hour and a half, and then the milk is paddled to ferment it, and at night time you sit around, you drink it, and you sing songs. And there I am, sitting with the chaps in the middle of them, and they're singing songs. And you've got no language communication, but there's communication from humanity, really. And I just loved that experience. It was very humbling. Here are people with really nothing in terms of material goods, but he was so proud to show me all his medals. So he pulled them out and showed me, and pointing and so on. And then starting to sing songs. And of course, Waltzing Matilda's a bit tame, let me tell you, in these situations, but and it's a reminder I need to learn some other songs. But their culture is just, I've again learned a lot from that. Mongolian nationals, 98% literate. Now, we're out in the middle of nowhere. There's no formed roads anywhere. But those children were off to school the next day in Ulaanbaatar. They'd be boarded. A very proud nation. The classical European canon, the opera house in the background there, a Russian pedagogical frame. And just to finish off, the other very important nation of people and a place that I call home is Finland. This is the parade at the beginning of the academic year, very formal in the Alexanderplatz and downtown Helsinki, and of course the countryside when you're not at work, and the sauna and the forests and lakes are an integral to being a Finn, as they are, I believe, for being a Tasmanian. And I have spent many, many holidays there in those where you're looking now. So just a little tribute there to enduring friends and enduring friendships. These are my very dear friends, Professors Hanali and Kalevi Rikkonen, both senior academics who are long retired from the University of Helsinki. But I take them as being a symbol, if you like, of enduring friendship and a very important part of my life. And during this time we keep in contact, of course. So coming home, I guess it's down to memories, and memories there are aplenty. But I also think there are new memories to make, and that we shouldn't just relax, that it's a case of moving forward and finding what the next steps are, and realising that, the past is a foreign country. You can't go back. The past is the past. It's a foreign country. It's a foreign country. I'm interpreting the past. I'm not there anymore. And our heroes, and these are some of my heroes from the geography world, they remind us of how much mental toughness we need to have if we're going to adapt to change. And I think that's part of the process for all of us at the moment during this extraordinary time that we're reflecting on a great deal. So moving on then. Come on. I want to go back. I like Mark Twain. I often use with my students the quotation from Mark Twain that there is confidence in ignorance. And let me tell you, the older I get, the more ignorant I believe I am. But there's a huge amount of confidence in ignorance around us, and his cynical way of seeing the world appeals to me. And I do like this. We need to cast off the bowlines and sail, sail, sail into the next sunset. So I'll leave you there and say thank you, and thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for listening. That note was written to me by a wonderful bridge partner of mine, Monica Hampton, an old Launceston citizen from a long time ago. Well, Monica wrote that. We were great correspondents, so she's analysing a hand there of bridge. And I quite like Rupert Brooke's poem. Where are we? I think it's there. Replace Tasmania with England.
Margaret, can I ask you a question?
Professor O'Flaherty, good morning.
If
My bridge partner.
Oh. Are you retired? No. I had an aunt, when she turned 90, her family said to her,
"What's your advice for the rest of the family, Aunt?" And she said, "Never give up work." So, never give up work. No, there's too many things to do, too many things to learn. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Well, on behalf of everybody here today and those watching on Zoom, Margaret, I'd like to thank you so very much for what's been an absolutely magnificent presentation. I think you'll all agree. Your reflections danced between the personal and the professional to create an extraordinary story of a jam-packed career. And I think we can all appreciate your talent as both a communicator and an educator to craft such an extraordinary experience for us all. I hope you've enjoyed trawling through your archive to find the materials that brought this story to life, from telegrams and written material to photos that evoke the atmosphere that you've experienced over your career. I think Margaret's story is an inspiring example of what a young woman from northwest Tasmania can achieve when they work hard, to make the most of the opportunities in their education, and then have the wit and the, I might even say bravery, to make the most of all the opportunities that have been put in Margaret's path and have led to her to achieve such a significant career and success, both in Tasmania, in Australia and internationally. I would say this story is going to be a fantastic addition to the oral history collections of the QV MAG, and I thank you so very much for contributing your energy and your craftsmanship to this presentation today. I hope you enjoy the present of our membership of the Friends of the QV MAG, and that we will see you at other events, because I know your intellectual capacity will contribute to them all. Thank you everybody for attending. Would you thank Margaret? It's great to see the room filling as everybody gets to know that these oral history talks are back on deck. We've organised for Rob Shaw, the sports editor of The Examiner, to be our speaker on the 23rd of June. Rob is going to reflect on the changes in technology over his career, as he said, from starting at a typewriter and hand set print to the digital age that he experiences today. So I hope you'll all come along and share the message that these programs are up and running and the enjoyment that we all get from them. Thank you for coming.